Hello, you're watching Roundtable. Has Europe finally woken up to the threat on its doorstep after Russia's invasion of Ukraine? At last, the continent seems to be speaking, acting with one voice, but is it too little, too late? Yes, there are now weapons going east, humanitarian aid on offer, and those sanctions, but the initial push came from elsewhere. What did that say about the EU acting as one? Very good to have you along. I'm David Foster. President Biden was sounding the alarm of an imminent invasion of Ukraine while European leaders procrastinated. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, thought that he could negotiate with Putin, but it was America's intelligence that proved to be right. Go back to the Balkans conflict of the 1990s, and while Europe backed neutrality for its UN peacekeepers, reports emerged of concentration camps and massacres. Only then did NATO finally agree to Bill Clinton's plans for airstrikes. And here we are again, Europe largely reliant on the United States for NATO spending and for the most reliable intelligence. This time around, though, Europe's biggest economy, Germany. It was initially unwilling to pull the plug on Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, despite warnings from Washington of Berlin's over-reliance on Russian gas. And yet when push came to shove, it said it would not commission the pipeline just yet. And Germany has finally given up on its historical ambivalence to militarization and is sending hardware to Ukraine, along with other EU member countries.
For the first time ever, the European Union will finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and other equipment to a country that is under attack.
Well, will they arrive in time to help? Has Europe, in fact, failed Ukraine? Let's start the discussion by a welcoming out of Prague. Pavel Havliček, Research Fellow at the Association for International Affairs, and then we cross to Berlin and say hello to Andreas Umland, an analyst at the Stockholm Centre for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. I think you'd both agree that within the last 10 days we have seen some positive, pretty much daily activity on behalf of the European Union setting out its stall to try and put pressure on President Putin. What do you think, first of all, you, Pavel, is the most important message that the EU has managed to get across to the Russian leader in the last week or so?
I think, first of all, it is the message that Europe is strong and united on this, because in the past we have seen different reactions. We have seen that the European Union used to be fragmented. There were different voices coming from Germany, Hungary, from the Nordic states and southern flank of the European Union. And now this is different. Now we see that there is a strong united Europe that is putting forward very ambitious and robust sanction mechanism, including the Russian banking system, including Russian finance. It is sending a powerful signal that Ukraine is not alone and Russia is the guilty one here. So this is very powerful, and I think this is the most important signal. What goes on the top is really that for the first time, the EU is actually supplying weapons to Ukraine. This is also unprecedented, and this is only illustrating how far the Russian aggression actually pushed Europeans.
There are two ways of looking at this. One is it's very good that these kind of statements and actions have arrived at all. The second way is looking at it and say, well, look, European Union was under pressure to do something because it had done very little up to that point, and therefore Ukraine, although it may be in a better position now than it was 4 or 5 days ago, has been fundamentally weakened by the very fact that Europe didn't act earlier.
I agree with you that we should have acted earlier. We should have pushed the Russians against, basically not back, not by diplomacy, not by words, but also by deeds. We should have been more ambitious in supplying actually whatever Ukraine needs right now. Now there are talks about supplying fighter jets. There are talks about supplies of small weapons. These could have been in the country much earlier. This is all done in emergency way through Poland right now. We are losing the channel, the ground in Ukraine right now, and this could have been done much earlier and prevented in this hustle moment when we are meeting overnight with yet another summit pushing for more sections. We should have been prepared. We should have been more coordinated earlier.
Well, do think about why the European Union was so slow to react. And I'll come back to that in a moment, Pavel, if I may. But Andreas, before I hear from you, I want to play this from the relatively new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Wir erleben eine Zeitenwende.
We are experiencing a turning point, and this means that the world after this is no longer the same as the world before it. In essence, it's a question of whether power can break right, whether we allow Putin to turn back the clocks of time of the great powers of the 19th century, or whether we have the strength to set limits to warmongers like Putin.
What he's saying, Andreas, is that this is a turning point in European history.
Yes, it is indeed. It is, in a way, you could argue, coming not too little, but it's coming too late. We have now partly simply the material problem that, for instance, Germany has now announced that it will deliver weapons, but we don't know how now to get these weapons actually to the front line. And the airports in Ukraine are partly destroyed, and it will be now difficult to actually implement some of the help that we have announced, which is impressive. For Germany, it's revolutionary, but it may not actually now quickly change something on the ground. And we need a change on the ground because Russia is escalating the war by the day. We have now actually missile attacks by Russia on large cities, especially in Kharkiv.
Okay, well, the question is, how do you then increase the pressure on Russia, given what's already been done? And one thing that people have referred to quite a lot, of course, is the European need for energy supplies and the fact that at the moment, Russia doesn't feel particularly under pressure when it comes to its oil, gas or coal. What could be done?
I think what could be done here now is a reassessment of the current security needs of Europe, because so far I think the discourse about Ukraine is mainly about European solidarity, sympathy, empathy, European values, protection of international law, human rights, democracy, and so on. We need to reimagine this conflict as a direct basic security threat to each European, basically. With oil, have this option always. Oil is fungible. You can transport it with tankers. And recently, we have also discovered that we can actually replace Russian gas with LNG.
But how quickly can we do that? That's the point, isn't it? I mean, yes, in the long term you can do it, but could it be done next week, next month, 2 months? What?
I know a little bit the situation in Germany. We are seemingly fine for this winter and for the summer. There's an issue for the next winter, but we would have still time to prepare for the next winter. And in any way, we need now quick action, and we need now to send signals to Moscow that we are ready to bear costs.
Okay.
But that is, of course, only
just to be clear, Andreas, just to be clear, you're saying that there's enough in reserve in Germany at the moment to last through the winter. Therefore, right now, Europe as a whole could perhaps say no to buying any more Russian oil and gas because come springtime, things may have changed.
Yes, as far as I understand, the situation is such that we can do that now. One reason being this gas hunger over the last months, which has apparently led to a reorientation of the gas flows.
And why do you think we're not doing it?
Because we imagine our role in this conflict as being one of providing solidarity, empathy, and protecting European values. but we are not. We are in the same continent, and if there is further escalation in Ukraine, it will actually touch upon our own basic national security.
Okay, I think Pavel wants to come in. Sorry to jump in on you, Andreas, but I'm leaving Pavel out a little bit, and you were waving your hand. I don't think anybody could see that except me. So say what it is you have to say.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to actually build up on what Andreas already mentioned earlier. So one thing is clearly the issue that we are basically perceiving the conflict not as ours, but as Ukrainians, and we are sort of taking the step back and keeping the distance, which I think is a mistake. It's our conflict as well. So here I agree. But also, obviously, we have a combination of other things, because obviously, when we see and have a look at the trade network with Russia, we see that in energy, this is a combination of short-term and also long-term contracts. Obviously, now we are focused a lot about on the short-term ones, and I definitely agree with Andreas that we have the possibility to cut off. We are slowly moving outside of the heating season, so this is a big plus for us. And also, and here I will help myself with the words of the Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky, who mentioned in December that Russia is actually sending us a big Christmas gift when manipulating with the prices of gas and lowering the transport of gas into Europe, because now we suddenly realize, okay, maybe we are not dependent so much. Maybe there is a way out. So here I think there is really a way out, and I think we should be looking for alternatives.
Right. Well, I want to talk about something else that perhaps is going to be rather difficult to sell in terms of a shifting narrative. Let's talk about militarization of European nations in terms of what they're sending to Ukraine, particularly Germany. And I'm going to play something from Josep Borrell, the EU's head of foreign policy.
You know that this €500 million will be devoted to provide defensive arms, but high-caliber arms, anti-tanks, all kind of equipment in order to repel the aggression. And member states have to provide these arms, and we have to coordinate with what they are doing and what we can do additionally with these resources. The fight is fierce. Kiev is resisting, Kharkov is resisting, Mariupol is resisting, and Russia is paying a high toll on number of casualties. But we have to provide ammunition, we have to provide high-caliber guns and anti-tank equipment.
Is there not a danger of the conflict escalating if we see guns, anti-tank missiles, and various other munitions coming from European countries and being used to shoot down or attack Russian vehicles or planes? Is that something that has to be taken into account here?
I would not say so. I would say that basically it is Russia escalating the conflict. It is Ukraine defending itself, its territory, its families, its children. That was pronounced by Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. I think this is not about escalating. This is the narrative that Russia tries to say and sell to the international audience, that the West is now escalating the conflict, but in fact, it's just the opposite.
But we're not necessarily talking about somebody who understands the rationale as such. Putin is seizing the emotion and the moment. And let's say a Polish missile shoots down a Russian plane. Let us say a Spanish anti-tank weapon takes out 15 Russian soldiers. That could be used by him, could it not, to make the conflict larger and escalate it in that way?
David, but do we care about this? I don't think we should care about this at this stage. We are already at the war stage.
But shouldn't we care about it when the man's talking about terrible times to come and talking about putting his nuclear arsenal on alert? Shouldn't we care about it? Or are we being cowardly if we just listen to him and do nothing?
I agree with the latter. We would act cowardly not to help Ukrainians in this conflict situation. We need to do whatever we can to basically bolster Ukrainians' defense. And I'm also of the conviction that we should also move as many of our soldiers and equipment to the Baltics, to the Black Sea region, to also the eastern flank of both EU and NATO, and to actually push Russia to dedicate resources to check on them. What if Vladimir Putin wants to play a game? Let's push back on this game.
So you're saying put NATO forces on or very close to the border with Russia and play a game of chicken with him?
Very much, very much. I am of the opinion.
What if he runs over the chicken?
He's not in position to do so. We see that the Russian forces are struggling already in Ukraine. He's in no position to act on this. And obviously, this would clearly lead to the Third World War and the nuclear disaster for everybody.
Okay, well, that's one heck of a gamble. There are enough dangers on the ground. Please, Andreas. Then I want to come talk about the nuclear reactors that there are inside Ukraine and the dangers from that and the no-fly zone. But sorry, please come back.
Yeah, contrary to public perception, the most Russian city outside Russia is not Sevastopol, but the Estonian city of Narva on the Russian-Estonian border. Estonia has a more restrictive citizen policy than Ukraine. For instance, if you move to Estonia as a Russian after 1940, I think you have to pass an examination to become an Estonian citizen. So it's much more restrictive than the policy that Ukraine had over the last 30 years. Nevertheless, Narva, as the most Russian city outside Russia, has been secure for the last 30 years. No problems, no security issues. Why? Because the stakes for a Russian engagement there are extremely high. Although Narva is just 140 kilometers away from Putin's birthplace, St. Petersburg. So it's very close, it's very Russian, and it's, it would be a potential aim for Putin, but he's not doing it because he's calculating the risks. This is something we have to also do in Ukraine. We have to increase the risks, the costs, and then he will behave differently.
Okay, can we talk about the more immediate risks? And I don't mean to short circuit the historical or contextual significance of any of this, but nuclear reactors. We know Chernobyl, massive damage caused when that went up in the 80s, but I think there are 4 sites, 4 nuclear power plants within Ukraine. One of them, the one, and you'll give me the pronunciation of it, it begins with a Z, one of them the largest in the whole of Europe with six reactors. These have got to stay safe. Do you think the Russians could target them? I'll start with you, Andreas, on that one, and then come to you, Pavel.
Well, as far as I know, the Zaporizhia power plant, which is the largest one in Europe with 6 active reactors, is already in the combat zone. And I don't think that Russia will target them. It wants to conquer them. The problem here is that for these large power plants, you need a functioning personnel and infrastructure. So you need enough engineers, you need enough water, you need everything to work well so that these reactors work properly. And they are now in the combat zone. So we are already in a very risky territory here. This is what I meant when I talked about Western national security interests. We are not going to be able to impose visa restrictions on Ukraine nuclear particles if they want to enter the Schengen zone. So we have to take this whole conflict far more seriously than we are currently. This is a threat to our own personal basic security. And then we can also talk about different kinds of responses in terms of cutting energy, in terms of delivering weapons and so on.
I want to play something now that happened in Poland. Boris Johnson, UK Prime Minister, confronted by a Ukrainian activist. Clearly, she was extremely emotional, and worth waiting to see what Boris Johnson's reply is. That's at the end of this.
Because you are afraid. Because NATO is not willing to defend. Because NATO is afraid of World War III, but it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister, but Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't know where to run. This is what is happening, Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you for getting here today. And I'm glad that you have been able to get here. And look, I just want to say that I'm acutely conscious that there is not enough that we can do as the UK government to help in the way that you want. And I've got to be honest about that.
Yeah, that was Daria Kaleniuk, and well, you could see how difficult Boris Johnson found it to answer that. At least he said, I'm going to be honest, there's very little more that we can do at the moment. She's talking about a no-fly zone. Andreas, let me come to you first of all. The danger with a no-fly zone is that if a Russian aircraft strays into it, if a Russian aircraft is deliberately sent into it and is shot down, that could make matters extremely complicated. Am I right?
Yes, if a Russian airplane is shot down by a NATO airplane or a NATO missile, although we had that already in Syria when Turkey, as a NATO member, actually shot down a Russian missile, a Russian fighter plane. Then there was a freeze in the relations between Turkey and Russia. And after half a year, they restored their relationship. So Russia is very sort of flexible in this way. But you could, for instance, help creating a no-fly zone by providing, for instance, Ukrainian fighter planes an airport outside Ukraine, because currently the airports are largely destroyed within Ukraine. And there's also now the problem of delivering any help to Ukraine.
Will
so
it
there
happen?
are different instruments to do that without actually involving NATO troops into this.
Do you think will there be a no-fly zone?
I think there will be no full-fly zone. I don't think that's actually possible to do.
Okay, so limited.
Yes, one could sort of move in this direction. There are apparently also electronic means with which this could be partly enforced. If you would have a combination of different instruments here, anti-aircraft missiles, fighter planes, electronic instruments, you could perhaps actually partly at least enforce that.
Okay, Pavel, I started the program, I mentioned to both of you beforehand, with three main topics. What has Europe done? What should it have done? And what should it do now? We've largely covered in the time available to us the first two. What should it do now?
I think we need to continue what we are doing now. So we have the consensus. We are ambitious in our response, both towards Russia. There can be certainly done more. We already touched upon energy. We should be also more ambitious when it comes to support of Ukrainians, both on the ground in terms of deliveries of armor, weapons, small weapons that are needed for the guerrilla fight. But also we need to be also basically united and also push back against the Russian influence in our own backyard, sort of. And I'm here very much welcoming the decision of the European Commission to ban the Russia Today, to ban Sputnik, that are basically spreading Russian propaganda and disinformation. We need to act also inside against the Russian influence, and also against basically the financial means, with asset freeze, with push back against oligarchs from Russia that are trying to launder money through our banks and buy beautiful mansions in France or assets in Londograd in the UK. So this is the third pillar that we need to be acting on.
Andreas, one of the things you mentioned to our producers was the problem we will be facing with Ukrainian refugees. Are the feelings within Europe that this is an entirely different situation, perhaps, to what happened with Syria, what happened with the refugees from there, what happens with the refugees from Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera? Is this special? And if it is, why?
There may be a larger readiness of the EU to accept even large amounts of Ukrainian refugees. And for instance, Poland, that did not want in 2015 to take refugees, is now taking most of the Ukrainian refugees. However, we may soon be in totally different scales. So we are now talking about 500,000, 500,000 refugees. Some people already mentioned 5 million refugees. If we have a humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, we could be talking about 15 million or 25 million refugees, and this is going to be simply beyond the capacities of Europe to
beyond the capacity or beyond the will.
I think if we get really in these very high numbers, who is going to take them, such large numbers? I mean, Germany took in 2015 1 million refugees, and that was a large challenge. If there are 10 million Ukrainian refugees, where are we going to, where are they going to live?
Pavel, you quickly. Sorry, we've got about 45 seconds.
I just wanted to quickly mention that there is this kind of, we see that from both the Central and Eastern European countries and also the rest of Europe. There is this sense of responsibility for what's happening now in Ukraine. I can see that in my own country, in Czechia. The same feeling is in Poland, where is already 1 million of Ukrainians living. So here the challenge is obviously huge. There are estimates about 7 million people coming from Ukraine, but I think we will manage, because Ukraine needs us on this.
Thank you both very much indeed. Those are issues to which we will undoubtedly return here on Roundtable as we focus in the coming weeks on what's happening between Russia and Ukraine and the rest of Europe. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to you for watching. This has been Roundtable. I'm David Foster. Until next time, goodbye.